My name is, oh, yeah, we need to do that, right? My name is Tanika Aiden. I am one of your MCs for today. We are here to talk about early education, and for a visual guide, I am an African American woman. I am in my 30s. I am wearing a colorful shirt with a black undershirt beneath it, and I'm sitting in front of a black chair with my background blurred out. I am a community advocate. Most important title is I am mom to a 9-year-old son with the lived experience of autism. And then I do a lot of work in the community with advocates. So thank you for having me today. We are going to go ahead and get things kicked off with our first speaker. And Taylor, did you want to say, hey, my co-MC for today?
Yes, my name is Taylor Crisp. I am one of your co-facilitators as well. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm excited to get things kicked off, and also happy International Women's Day. And I also want to say rest in power to Judy Human. So, and can't wait to get this day kicked off and show our fiery passion towards hopefully eliminating the restraints and isolation process, and but increasing more special education services.
Awesome. All right, so we're going to kick it off with Christina Brown from Kindering, and she's going to be talking about early education. So welcome, Christina Brown.
Thank you so much. And Tanika, can you remind me how long I have?
You have 10 minutes.
Perfect. Okay. Thank you so much. So yes, my name is Christina Brown. I am the Director of Communications and Public Affairs at Kindering. Visual description, I am a white woman wearing a green blazer and a little gold chain necklace in front of a purple background that has our big Kindering logo. Thank you all for your continued interest in our bill, which we are working on alongside lots and lots of other early support providers like Kindering across the state. Our bill was HB 1676. This was the bill to increase investment in the early support system for infants and toddlers across the board. So that would be increasing the state funding for basically the first stage of special education. So the first stage of special education is for children birth to 3 years old. It typically looks like services such as individual one-on-one, feeding therapy, occupational therapy, physical therapy, things like that. Usually those services are delivered in the home. And like I said, it's the first stage of special education. So our goal this year was to make sure that when the state is looking at doing all these exciting investments in special education, that we don't forget also investing in the first stage of special education. Part of the reason for that is because early support providers like us actually help kids set up really, really little kids for success later down the line in special education. I think it's about 30% of kids statewide who do early support services no longer need special education at age 3. And for those who do continue to benefit from services, we help them and their families transition into the school system. So it's really, really important. Unfortunately, HB 1676 died right after having a beautiful hearing where lots of you signed in pro. There was no one signed in con. We had like 620 people signed in pro. So we were a little disappointed, to be perfectly candid with this group. But as all of you know, that doesn't mean it's really dead. And so we're sort of working on the next strategy. We're currently working with the prime sponsor, Representative Tana Sen, who has been a wonderful advocate, has continued to prioritize our ask. And, all things are on the table right now, including a budget proviso. And so what I would ask this group is, stay tuned. I will definitely continue to be in touch and make sure that if we have legislative action items that gets out to all of you, because I truly believe that all the support that we got during the hearing is a big part of why our ask continues to be a priority for our prime sponsors. So I really thank you for all of that. And basically just have to ask you to stay tuned because as you all know, it's House of Origin cutoff today. And so lots of things are in flux. And so I should have a more concrete ask for everyone in the coming weeks. But I just want to reiterate that we are continuing to advocate for this. I think Taylor's words were fiery passion. That's absolutely still there. And it will continue to be until the very last day of session, and maybe past that, who knows? Just want to make sure that as we continue to fight for appropriate investment in the special ed system, that we're fighting for the entire special ed system, including early supports. So that's it for me, unless anyone has any questions. And I'll put my email in the chat in case anyone wants to follow up. Yeah, thank you, Stacy. I am hopeful as well that it will become NTIB or a proviso. There are other, like I said, everything's on the table. There are also potential options for amending our language onto other bills. We'll see. But I'll keep this group posted as we as things get more firmed up.
All right, any questions for Christina? All right.
Thank you for putting your email in the chat, Christina. Also, Erica said that there's the acronym for NTIB is necessary to implement the budget. And speaking of Eric, Eric Warwick is our next speaker from the Arc of King County. So if Eric is ready, unless if there's any questions, and Eric can take it away.
Yeah, thank you. So I first, Eric Warwick, not Eric Mathis. Thank you, Taylor. First, I want to share a resource that the Arc of King County created about a topic and a bill I'm going to discuss with you today. The bill is 1479, and the topic is restraint and isolation, something I have lived experience with, and also something I've seen while I've worked as a paraeducator. So I want to just an easy read, has plain language text, but it also has pictures / icons to help people read it easier. It's something developed for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, but it's also something we found everyone really enjoys for information delivery. Yeah, so I forgot to give a visual description for myself. Sorry about that. I'm a white person wearing glasses. I have a bun sort of thing happening with my hair, and I'm wearing a pink shirt. So I want to start off with talking about just some stories, a few about my experiences with this. There's a lot of days that I'll never forget. One of them is in my program that I was in. It was a behavior program in the Bellevue School District. It often ran out of isolation rooms to use. So an isolation room, if you don't know, is a place that many schools across the state and across this country will put kids, sometimes actually adults in transition programs. I've seen that happen, and to make them unable to move around anywhere. Supposedly it's for safety, but it is shown to be extremely harmful. So my program had an isolation room in every classroom that was next to each other. There were doors between the classrooms in the special education setting. Some days they were all used up. This was one of those days. I was most likely just around this time of year, actually around eight years old I was for this one, and I was either being stubborn or I swore or something. They really got upset when 8-year-olds swore, by the way. I have autism and an emotional behavioral disability. It's just how I am. They read that as non-compliance. And they said, either you go to the isolation room or we force you in there. They had forgotten they left the kid in there. And I never chose willingly to go to an isolation room. If you were going to put me in there, it was going to be a fight. So they had everyone clear off all their desks, standard procedure for them, move their desks in a line so that they could facilitate restraining me and dragging me to an isolation room. I was put into a floor restraint on my back. They took off my shoes, also really standard for them to do. 3 adults for 1 child. And I was dragged and they found out, oh, we actually have a child in there, and they dragged me then to another classroom, which they also had to disrupt. And they also had everyone move all their desks around. And they too, also in that classroom, the isolation room was being used to isolate a child for hours. So what they did was they held me for a bit longer, and they dragged that kid out of that isolation room because they felt that that child was ready to be dragged out. And then they put me in there. A few hours later, some other child was being restrained and they wanted to isolate them. They thought that I was calmed down enough and regulated, which they did not think for the last, several hours that I was in there. And they dragged me out. And I was not happy, to say the least. And I fought back against that, and I was put in a number of restraint. I remember the teachers and paraeducators that day talking about how hard their day was. And I imagine it was. It's still hard for me, even with my experience working with students with significant behavioral challenges, to accept that, just because of how it impacted me as a child. Another day I won't forget is I was working as a one-on-one for a student in a school district in Western Washington, in a high school, and he went to the alternative school that also had the transition and life skills programs. He often was not going to school. That's part of why he had a one-on-one. So when he didn't go to school, I was assigned to the chronically understaffed life skills room. And I was eager to go because I wanted to be there to support students with disabilities. That's something I feel very strongly about. They were shocked I was there. Every time I'm substituting or going into a program that works with students with disabilities, they're always shocked the substitute or someone else has shown up. They didn't know what to do with me. I got to be basically shadowing another one-on-one for a student that they considered extremely dangerous, or just they didn't think him as really a human being. At this time I was like 21 years old. I just turned 21 or so, and this student had to be at least 18, 19 years old to at least be in this program, not much younger than me. He's non-speaking, and he was left alone in a large room with one other person. It's a really dull environment. I mean, I was having trouble with it, just as an autistic person. And he also, I was told his diagnosis was autism as well. And he had some STEM toys that he was allowed if he supposedly behaved or worked on his AAC stuff. And his one-on-one, just all they wanted to do was just leave him there and read a book. And if he moved around or anything like that, then he would be put in an isolation room. Sometimes they realized, well, we have to actually pretend to do something to give him some sort of communication supports or education. They tried to get him to work on his AAC, and he would have a hard time with that. He would get frustrated, and start moving around in the way they said was threatening or dangerous. I didn't really understand why they thought that. And every time he did that, he would be thrown into an isolation room. This isolation room was just pads stacked together. Wasn't really even a room. You could technically monitor the student in there if you wanted to, if you like stood up and looked over the enclosure. This is not a way to treat people. This is not a way to treat people with disabilities or anyone. I want people to understand that we can do better. And I know we can do better because I've worked in programs that have done better. I worked in the Spokane Public Schools. I worked in a program substituting in a program that used to have a lot of trouble with routinely restraining and isolating students. So much so that there was a lot of media attention to this program, this specific school, and they got training and they felt safer, they felt supported, the students and the staff, when they got that training and when they changed their practices. The isolation room was there, and I still, anytime I see an isolation room, I feel a lot. And I especially feel for the students who have been in there, who I've worked with. But they were not using it, and they knew that they had alternatives, and they felt empowered to use them. They felt empowered to help me as a substitute paraeducator understand how to help them do the escalation. I have my own experiences. I can understand how to help de-escalate students in certain situations, how to, prevent certain things from happening, and that was certainly appreciated by my coworkers. We can do better, and we must do better. And I don't want what happened to me to continue happening. I don't want what happened to my students to continue happening. I hope you get a chance to read our easy read guide on the bill 1479. That's going to significantly push us forward towards ending these practices in our state, and I'm available for questions.
Thank you, Eric. I also wanted to ask real quick. So the school district you went to, you said it was Valley School District? It was a...
So I worked in a school district in Western Washington, and I worked in the Spokane Public Schools, which has, as of now, eliminated the use of eliminated the use of isolation and significantly limited the use of restraint.
Okay. Because yeah, I was born and raised in Spokane County, and I kind of remember those practices when I was younger going to school. I mean, luckily I wasn't isolated. However, their form of isolating me was throwing me out when I had a behavior, was throwing me out in the hallway on a desk and embarrassing me in front of the class, and me writing on a paper why I was a bad kid today. So I remember that as a kid, and I also remember being called the mentally R word by a school psychologist. So yeah, so schools, when they isolate, it's almost like a form of institutionalization, because it's just, you're basically imprisoning kids, especially kids with disabilities, in an education system while they're young. So it's like, that's, I just wanted to reiterate that. Sorry, I didn't mean to take over. I just
thank you. I think it's really
important
that all of us share our stories. I'm not the only person who's experienced this. I know I'm not the only self-advocate who's experienced this. I also want to thank you for bringing up that point about it. I spent 2 weeks in inpatient psych unit at Seattle Children's when I was 7. And that was the first time I'd been in an isolation room. Every time that I was put in an isolation room, I would feel what I felt in there. So it's really awful. It's not what we should be doing.
We have a couple raised hands. I can't see who has them raised, but whoever has theirs.
Diana, I think I saw first,
Yeah.
and then Josie.
Hi, Eric, thank you so much for sharing that story. Because I know it's very hard on the child, and for parents whose children are treated that way, it's also very much a struggle. My son, when he was 7, he was this little skinny 7-year-old kid, and they used to call me to the school to pick him up And one day I walked in, here's this skinny little 7-year-old face down on the carpet with 4 large women sitting on each of his limbs. I can't say how distraught I was seeing that. And the special ed director and I worked, we decided to get him into a different school who had a behavioral specialist there. They never had to restrain him or seclude him again. And I'm wondering, did you ever, when you were in school going through this, ever have any staff member who said, wait, let's try something different? Or was it just that way and it stayed that way?
I don't know. I know that a lot of people were very upset when they were doing this, and they took that upset they turned that upset
Muchas personas se habían molestado conmigo porque no creían que yo podría hacer eso, que no se me va a hacer tal cosa. Y no es un mensaje que las personas deben de recibir, es terrible.
Okay, just a
Estoy
minute.
seguro.
Eric, I think we have one of the interpreters who moved over into this channel. Carmen, can you check that?
Sorry about that. Took care of it. Thank you,
Okay.
Diane.
Okay,
My
Carmen,
apologies to everybody.
no problem. Okay, Eric, go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so I know that there were likely many paraeducators and other teachers who were very upset at this happening. They told me that it was my fault. They turned their upset at me because they couldn't deal with their emotions. I experienced the threat of restraint and isolation throughout my time in that program, and the last time I experienced it was when I was 13. So
I'm so sorry you went through that.
You're a pretty popular speaker here. You've got the chat just saying like how much they think you get a lot of praise for speaking, and people are just moved by your lived experience. Chat's just blown up. I don't know if I'll have time to go through it because it's just your story was very well moved, and I do think we have a couple of hands raised. It is 10:23. We have a little bit of extra time. I mean, if you're okay with answering a couple more questions, or are you okay with that?
absolutely.
Okay, I think I don't know if Tammy had their hand first or Josie had their hand up first.
I think it was Josie and then
Okay.
Yeah, Josie and then Tammy, it looks
Okay.
like for me.
Do you want to ask your question, Josie? There you go.
Well, I don't have a question. It's more I have something to say. Thank you for sharing your story with us, Eric. I'm sorry that has happened to you. I hope that we can improve our school system so that doesn't happen to anybody else. But I was born in the 80s, and I went to school in 85, and I went to middle school in 90, but when I would get in trouble, I would often be sent to detention. And so would other kids be sent to detention. So it wasn't like I was alone, but a lot of times detention happened during lunch. And when detention happened during lunch, your lunch got even shorter than it would normally. So there you are scarfing down your lunch for the last 10 minutes of lunch and spending 40 minutes in detention. Not every school is perfect. Not every school does, when students do wrong or bad children, do everything correctly. I don't think my school was right on the ball of, hey, we should send this kid to detention and make them lose more than half of their lunch. So now they're scarfing down their lunch. And so I don't think that it was right. And we need to improve our school system to And some students even had what was called Saturday school. Now, Saturday school, you had to come to school on a Saturday and spend all day at school on a Saturday. And if I ever had Saturday school, my school was more than 10 miles away, you know. And so my mom would be very mad at me and tell me that I had to pay her for the gas money to drive me to the Saturday school if I ended up having Saturday school. But my problems were dealt with at school, so I most likely did not have Saturday school because I was like, wait, I don't want to use my chore money to pay my mom to drive me to Saturday school. You know, I mean, I don't want my mom mad at me, but a lot of times her best friend, Chris Holt, would tell on me and say, hey, Josie was bad today and she got detention. She had to sit in detention during lunch. I mean, a lot of times she would tell on me to my mom and I didn't not like that. And it caused me to run away from the home that I would put in. And so I did not like being told on to my parents, and I did not like the portion of the detention, but it wasn't like I was isolated or put into a closet of some sort like you were. And I'm sorry that happened to you.
Thank you, Josie, for sharing your story. I think
Got
we
a couple
probably have
things.
time for two more, and then we have to move on in our agenda. And Tammy, I think you were next there.
Yeah, thank you. I'll make it quick. First of all, thank you, Eric, for sharing your story. I'm sure it wasn't easy to discuss that all over again. I also was wondering what services or people helped you to become a strong advocate now?
Thank you for that question. I kind of stumbled on disability advocacy by accident. And it was really emotional for me because, as I mentioned before, I internalized what happened to me as being my fault and being the reason for why I was just a terrible person who shouldn't, kind of exist. And it was a great shock to me that there were people working on this issue who said it was wrong and said it was not okay. And that really helped me. I also want to share a poem in the chat by Laura Hershey called You Get Proud by Practicing. It's really, to me, an essential one. I come back to it every once in a while when it's too difficult sometimes to work on advocacy. Every kind of advocacy is very difficult. Self-advocacy is no different. And this poem by a self-advocate, Laura Hershey, is really, really important. And I definitely would give it a read if you can. So I just want to say, if you've experienced something similar, you're not alone and it's not your fault. And I am proud of what you are doing and whatever that is. And thank you everyone for listening to me and to this story and for fighting for students who are still going through this. So thank you.
And Eric, did you have, I think you'll probably be the last one there, Eric Mathis.
Yes, thank you. I just want to say great job to Eric Horrocks' story. It really moved me. It just reminded me of some past experiences that I don't feel like sharing, but I'm glad that you're a strong advocate. So good job, Eric.
Thanks, Eric. I
You're
appreciate it.
welcome.
And Eric, you have a lot of love in the chat there. There's stories, there's people sharing kudos, a lot of hearts. So please read through there. There's some amazing words for you. So thank you so much for sharing your story today here.
Thank you.
All right, and now we are going to hear from Disability Rights Washington on a report coming into the light. And I believe they're here, right?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, Andrea's here. All right, passing it on to Andrea. Thank you for being here, Andrea.
Hi, good morning. Thank you very much. Thank you, Eric. So first of all, my name is Andrea Kadlik. I'm an attorney with Disability Rights Washington. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I have brownish long hair, and I'm sitting in my office this morning and not wearing my glasses. And what we've been working on at Disability Rights Washington over the last couple of years is restraint and isolation in schools. And so I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what that is, because some people don't even know that this happens in schools. Restraint is when adults put their arms around children so that children are unable to move. And it's only supposed to happen if a student is about to be seriously hurt. So if a little student is about to run in front of a bus, then we want the teacher to scoop that student up and restrain them, right? Because we don't want children to get hit by a bus. But the challenge is that restraint is used much more than for just emergency purposes. And so what you heard Eric talking about earlier is that teachers sometimes use restraint for compliance, and sometimes it's used for discipline. And so that's the problem that we're up against. Some of the problems that we're up against. So isolation is where you put a student in a locked room where they are alone and they cannot leave. And the rooms that we are talking about are usually closet-sized, and they have a lock on the outside that an adult has to hold. There's usually a small window where the adult can watch inside of the room, and they're often padded. So they're very much like cells. So we went around to school districts and schools across Washington and over the last 2 years, and we did a report with the ACLU. We did over 145 interviews of that were 45 minutes each. We interviewed students, principals, assistant principals, teachers, paraeducators, counselors, behavior analysts, school psychologists, superintendents, special education directors, district safety officers, union representatives. We interviewed parents. Most importantly, though, the most interviews we did were with children who and students who've been restrained and isolated, and with we also did parent interviews, and we talked to students and adults who had been restrained and isolated as children or in school, like Eric. So what we found, the other things that we did for the report, I guess quickly, we did a statutory analysis. So we looked at all the laws across the country around restraint and seclusion in school. We did, we looked at research of best practices, and we also did a big analysis of the data in Washington, all the schools that have reported use of restraint and isolation, and we looked at who was being restrained and isolated. So, and what we found is that there's really stark disparity in restraint and isolation use. So That means there are students who are restrained and isolated more than others. And what we found is we're taking the students who experience the most trauma in schools, and we're re-traumatizing them by over-restraining and over-isolating them. So students who are homeless, students who live in poverty, students who are in foster care, students who are Black and multiracial, students who are in kindergarten through grade 5, and students with disabilities are restrained and isolated the most. We also found that this happens much more than for emergency situations. And for example, students were restrained when they ripped paper off the bulletin boards. They were restrained because a teacher thought they might do something dangerous or they might run away. They were restrained or isolated for not following directions. So what we're really talking about here is changing adult behavior, right? We want to give teachers and paraeducators and staff support in schools so that they have other strategies to use for students who are in crisis. Because when a student hits that space where they have those big behaviors, that means that student is in crisis, right? And so if you're at a point where you need to restrain or isolate a student, then and I would argue you never need to isolate a student. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you do need to restrain a student, then and because that student is in crisis, it's not because the student is bad. It's not because they are a behavior problem or explosive or violent or dangerous or all the negative things that we hear. It's because that student is in crisis. So we want to give teachers and educators better tools to support students who are in crisis so that we have more peaceful classrooms. And that's what we're talking about with our bill, which is House Bill 1479. Okay, so I guess a couple of things. One of the questions I saw in the chat was what works? And there are several things that school districts do to eliminate isolation and to reduce the practice of restraint. One of the things that schools can do is they can do a look behind for every incident of restraint and look at what went wrong, what could staff do differently, does the student have appropriate supports in the classroom? And then at the building level, those things really work. And we know that we can reduce and eliminate isolation. Entire states have eliminated isolation. We have school districts in Washington that have eliminated isolation. And we have school districts and schools that have reduced. I worked with one principal who reduced restraint from 700 incidents in a year down to 12. Because they put the right supports in place for students. So, so one way to do that is to look at the individual incidents and debrief with the team in the school. Another way to do that is to have the school board and the superintendent monitor the use of restraint and isolation, monitor the numbers and make sure that those numbers are going down. And that's another thing that our bill does. And the other thing is really getting professional development into schools so that teachers have alternative, so teachers don't see this as discipline and have other things to do to manage behavior. And the other piece that's really important is making sure that students have appropriate supports in school. So appropriate IEPs, school that's engaging, and interventions for social emotional learning, interventions for mental health, interventions that are academic, and interventions for what am I forgetting? Appropriate interventions, let's just say that. All right. What questions do you all have for me? Some of the opposition that we're hearing to the bill is that we are taking tools away from teachers and educators by taking away isolation and reducing restraint. And so what it's really important that we tell legislators is that this bill does just the opposite of that. We are giving additional tools to teachers and to administrators so that they know what to do instead of restraint or isolation. This bill also targets the schools that need this training the most, and it funds professional development for this. So I know that there are many teachers who've been meeting with legislators and saying that they get hurt during restraint and isolation. We also know that students get hurt during restraint and isolation, and that when we reduce these practices, that injuries go down for both staff and for students. And so that's an important thing to tell legislators also. I think one thing I didn't mention that's really important to talk about, it's also kind of hard to talk about, is that these restraint and isolation they cause a lot of damage. They further disable students for life. So we talked to adults who had post-traumatic stress disorder from repeated restraint and isolation use, anxiety, depression. We talked to students who had suicidal ideation after restraint and isolation, people who startled to touch, adults who startled to touch because of restraint, and trouble with relationships as adults, mistrust in education, mistrust in authority, mistrust in institutions. It's also important to note that these practices are part of the school to prison pipeline. And Josie, you had a very articulate story about being pushed out of class and being put in detention repeatedly and having to eat lunch really fast. So there are lots of different ways that students are pushed out of the classroom, and restraint and isolation is another one. And so it's really important that we stop all those sort of exclusionary discipline practices because they do a lot of harm. Okay, Stacy. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I have a quick question. Does the training could it also apply to the family as well, or is it only the educators that would get the training?
So you're asking about families? That's a great question. This training would be for educators, but to your point, I think families need training too, right? And families need a lot of support. And we have a mental health crisis in Washington where students and families need a lot of support. And so that's not addressed within this bill, but it's being addressed elsewhere, and it's a problem that many advocates are working on. So, Stacy.
Hi, Andrea. First, I just wanted to make sure everybody knows that Andrea has been a significant champion on this issue. During the legislative session, I personally know she was up till 2 in the morning watching all the arguments about this bill, and I just want to make sure and acknowledge that and thank you, Andrea, for everything that you're doing and leading this issue. You answered my first question, which was, can you tell us a little bit about what the opposition was? Because about 1/3 of the legislators still voted no for this bill, and it has a significant uphill battle in the Senate. And so we need to be super vigilant about it. I think reflecting this week, the death of Judy Heumann has really ignited, I think, the energy around disability justice, and there couldn't be a better issue that we're tackling right now. Somebody put in the chat that there's a pretty fine line between isolation and segregation. And we know that kids that are segregated and seen as different are much more quick to experience this kind of isolation and restraint as well. So they're issues that go hand in hand. And again, Andrea, I just want to thank you so much for everything you're doing to stay on top of this for us.
Thanks, Stacy. Yeah, isolation is segregation. This is all, it's, you know, the way the prison, school to prison pipeline works for people with disabilities. Malia?
So I, um, do they have to tell the parents currently when they do this? And do they do that all the time?
Yes and no.
And what?
Yeah.
I would be so angry if I heard if that happened to my child, what recourse would I have?
Yeah, if that happens to your child, you can call Disability Rights Washington. The law says that they're supposed to notify the parent by phone the same day, and they're supposed to follow up in writing within 5 days. They're also supposed to report to the state. Not all schools do that. That's one of the things that our bill changes, is it requires every place where there's an educational program has to report restraint and isolation. For parents who don't get notice, we do get those calls where we've had calls where mom, for example, found out that her kindergarten son had been isolated for months before she was told about it. So you can file a complaint to the state when that happens. It's something that's called a community complaint, and we can talk to you about what that is and how to do that at Disability Rights Washington if that happens to you. But yes, you're supposed to get notice.
So, and then would you consider this isolation if your daughter didn't do the work and was irritating the other children in the class, and they put her to it's called the WIN room, what I need room? Is that?
I don't know what the WIN room is. So what we are talking about are rooms that are locked where students cannot leave. And so if that's what happened, then yes, that's isolation. I think and thank you, Tanya, put the link for that community complaint in the chat. Thank you for that. So there's a lot of confusion about what isolation is and isn't. And to Stacy's question, like, what's the opposition? I think this is part of it. So we are not talking about taking a student to a quiet space or letting a student go to a quiet nook where there's a beanbag and hanging out. We're not talking about going on a walk with a student or taking a student to the principal's office. Students can self-select, and they do self-select to go into isolation rooms and sleep, and or just, there's not a lot of stimulation in there. And so sometimes it's just a quiet space to be, and the door's not locked. That's not isolation. We're not taking any of that away. What we are talking about is often restraint. What happens is a student is restrained and then they are dragged into an isolation room, which is very dangerous. That's where a lot of injuries occur, because you're dragging a student and then you're trying to disentangle yourself from the student and put them into this place and close the door. And then the door is locked and the student cannot leave. And so that's what we're talking about when we're talking about isolation. And that does happen frequently in schools. So I would ask the teacher lots of questions. I would ask if it's an isolation room. I would ask if it's locked. Because if it is, then they have to notify you and they have to report to the state that that's what they're doing.
All right. Okay. So it is now 10:50. We are about 5 minutes ahead of schedule. Thank you so much, Andrea. And this is great. This was awesome. Like this topic, and I love the interest and the engagement. And thank you so much for sharing. And I really appreciate it. We do have to move on to our next speaker, though. Melinda Bocci from School to Work. She's from DVR, but she's gonna speak on School to Work and how that works. Thank you so much again, Andrea. I really appreciate you and you being here and your presence, and it helps. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for having me. My name is Melinda Bocci, and I'm with DVR. And thank you, everybody, for sharing your stories. I am with DVR, the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation, but I've been in this field for a very, very, very long time. I come from an employment agency where I was there for, gosh, 5 years. Oh, I'm sorry, Melinda. So I'm a Caucasian woman. I have brown hair. It's in a ponytail right now. I'm wearing black glasses and I have a headset on and a navy blue shirt, and my background is blurred. So I'm in my home right now. Sorry about that. But thank you for sharing your stories. It is so important to hear. So I'm here to talk about school to work. I know I don't have loads of time, but so I was saying I came from an employment agency, and then I was at a county for 15 years, and now I'm with the state at DVR. And I'm really happy to be here because there's a lot of stuff going on for students. And so I was hired on to basically take House or Senate Bill 5790, which brings school to work into, excuse me, brings it to all the counties of the state. So that's what I'm working on. So before I get into what I've been working on, a little bit about school to work. School to work, so when I talk about school to work, I am focusing in on those transition years of 18 to 21 for individuals. School to work is for folks who are in their last year of transition, so generally 20 to 21. They do have to be a part of Developmental Disabilities Administration, or DDA, and they have to have that intellectual and developmental disability and stay in school, so, which is always a good thing and for a lot of people, not always the best case, but we want folks to stay in school. So what the School to Work program does is it helps students transition out of their school system into the adult world through employment and through systems working together to make that transition seamless. It is systems working together. It's counties, employment agencies, DDA, DVR, schools, everybody working together to get that student on that track to seamlessly leave school behind and go into the adult world. And essentially, the schools are so incredible with supporting students and being there for families and really being able to replace that system with an employment adult system. So I've worked with loads of families over the years, and that's a big concern. Like, I had these teachers, they were so great. They knew my child, they knew me as the student. But now that whole piece is to help people have a new system in place with an employment provider and everybody. So that's the big piece. Excuse me. A little piece around what 5790 is. So there was legislation that came through, and it basically said school to work is a working model that works. It gets students jobs, but it's not all everywhere. As it stands right now, we have 7 contracts with counties, DVR does, to provide this service in that last year. And so legislation said, let's bring it everywhere. Let's get to the rural areas. Let's get to folks who are in tribes. Let's get to people who are underrepresented. How can we bring this across the state, not just to the counties that have resources or on their I-5 corridor or some big corridor or freeway, how to do that. So legislation came through, and here we are. And I was hired to do this work, and it's been wonderful. And so we're moving forward. A couple more things around 5790 before I talk more about what I've been doing with school to work. There's some other components to it. There is a data sharing, excuse me, I'm getting over a cough. There is a data sharing piece from OSPI, the Office of Superintendent for Public Instruction, where they will share, they're setting that up, and I'm not sure if Tanya's going to speak to that, but there's a data share piece to it where OSPI working with students to share their information with these systems. And so our hope is that how we see this is if we're looking at 18 to 21 transition time for students, getting their names, getting who they are through the OSPI data share in that first year, getting them connected. Are you part of DDA? Did you sign up for SSI? Did you go to DVR? Getting them connected, looking to make sure we have another program I won't talk too much about called Job Foundation. Job Foundation is there in that middle year of transition, which is another way to get some more employment stuff under your belt and get connected and get some resources going. And then going into that last year of school to work. And that's where this comes in. So we're working on this overarching flow to get to jobs before you exit school. So things that I've been doing around 50, I'm sorry, one more thing. There's also some other pieces to 5790. We will be putting together a statewide transition council to help with these efforts across the state. And then I'm also going to be hiring 3 positions to help me with these, with all these efforts across the state. So lots of things happening, and I'm happy to come back again at some point, not necessarily at this, how it works, but to give more updates. So with 5790, so what I did is I stopped everything and I reached out to all the counties, and thinking there's 39 counties across the state. 7 of them have a school to work contract, so they're doing the work. So my big purpose was to get out there to the counties who don't and ask them what they need. 5790 put money into the hands of DVR to help with these efforts. And so working with the counties to see what they need, how can we help them stand up a school to work program? And so with that, we have developed a school to work program development side where counties can now, it's done, it's out there. We're trying to get it figured out with counties to get this contract in place to help them put together a program. If it's hiring staff, putting together information, resources, trainings, whatever, I'm working with those counties to figure out what they need. And the hope is that they'll get their program up and going, and then we can get them onto the other side where the other school to work contracted counties are, that direct service. Get them into the schools, get them with the students, and help them work with students. So there's 2 things going right now, helping counties that don't have school to work, helping them stand up a program. And then also the current program, the hope is that everybody will be doing that, because that's the work of 5790, getting students jobs. So that is the shortest nutshell I can give as far as the work that's being done. And then just some more other pieces I just wanted to point out in my own notes that I have. I'm continuing to work with the counties of having conversations with community partners, the employment agencies, the counties, internally with DVR, working with DDA, OSPI, everybody. There's lots of things happening. I've been in this field for a long time, and I love these efforts because the first time in my 20 plus years of being in this field, systems are talking, and there's a lot of transparency out there, and I love the collaboration that's coming about. So first time I've seen that, which is wonderful. So all of this work will continue, and hopefully we'll be able to give some updates along the way as we start to get school to work out there where it doesn't exist right now. So with that, I'm wondering if there's any questions. I'm not watching chat. I'm not, if anybody has anything that they would want to say that's in the chat, that'd be wonderful. But are there any questions?
And if you don't use tech, feel free to wave at the screen. We'll call on you if you have any questions. Oh, Margaret Lee came unmuted. Margaret Lee, do you have a question?
I don't have a question. I just want to say how happy I am to hear all this news. I mean, when Dan graduated in 1990, it was unusual that he got a good job at Microsoft. And I'm just so grateful that it's finally really moving. Isn't that great across the state? I'd give you a pat on the back if I could.
Oh, it's great to see you, Margaret Lee. And I feel the same way. I've been in this field for like 24 years. I don't know how long, but it really, to see such incredible movement for students is just wonderful. And I come from a county that had school to work. And so I know the cool things that can happen, and to see such incredible movement and collaboration. And then also being at the forefront of just knowing what needs to be worked with. When I started having those conversations with the counties, some trends came out pretty easily. Some trends came out. A big thing is the roles and responsibilities. Who does what and when? What does this person do versus this person? Or even terminology. Somebody pointed out the word plan, and just, I think this is a time where we can actually really work together and add a lot of clarity for the sake of students getting jobs. And it is exciting. So I appreciate your comment there, Margaret Lee. It's good to see you.
Yep, Stacy, you have a question?
Not a question. I was waiting to see if people had questions, but I just wanted to say thanks again, Melinda. We're so lucky to have you in this role.
Thank you.
This is a super exciting project, and I can't think of a better person who could pull it together. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I love, if anybody knows me, I love to collaborate and talk and bring people together and figure things out together. So it's been really amazing to be able to do that. And so thanks for that. I appreciate it.
I think we have one more, Chris.
Hi, everybody. This is Chris Brandt from At Work, and I will second very strongly what Stacy just said, and have seen in my 50-year career what really good transitions that student services can mean to a person with disability. And, you know, and the statistics prove it. And it's not just this, you know, the statistics, it's how, the look on their faces and how it changes their lives and how people come to respect them and have the same expectations for them as they do everyone else, which can help in some of the horrible things that we talked about earlier in this advocacy day. So I too am very excited about the collaborations that are happening, you know, for the potential for it to spread statewide. You know, we're in Kings, Snohomish, and Spokane County. And there is school to work in those counties, but we'd like to help further that across the state. I think we do a pretty good job getting most of our students jobs that they like before they graduate, and then we don't give up. We leave no one behind. We don't give up till we get them a job. And having the support of both rehab and DDA and the school districts and everyone has really made that difference. So I'm hoping we can also all really work together to stabilize the system and get really good people as staff working for us in these new programs so that we can do this as well as concurrent services with community inclusion. We need to pay people really good because this is really important work. So just pay, just a lot more people committed to this field, and then justice for people with disabilities in the school and as they leave it. It's a big transition in everyone's life. So kudos to you. I couldn't think of a better person in this role.
Thanks, Chris. Well, I do come from Chris at work. I'm cut from that cloth of At Work, which started my career years ago. Thanks, Chris. I appreciate it.
And then I think we have time for one more. Leah, did you have a question or comment?
I have some families that are choosing to homeschool. Is there a way to, I don't know, bring this program to them or convince them to go back to school? It's not too late. I don't know what I'm asking. It's just, it seems that they're missing out on a big, a program that could be very useful to them and reduce isolation in the future. I just worry.
Yeah, and that's a great question. One thing that I'm really hoping we'll see more of is first of all, that data share. We're going to hopefully find more students who are in situations that we can help with. And I'm really big about knowledge, you know, sharing the knowledge of what's possible so they can make informed decisions. And working for the county we did have cases like that where you had students who were at home and they were going to miss out on certain things because they were at home. But the biggest thing is helping to make sure they have the information, the knowledge they need to know what their options are. And then also some success stories too. My hope is with 5790 as things start to really roll out, we have success stories everywhere, which are always so wonderful. And so being able to share different success stories for those kind of situations, you know, yes, this is the choice you're making right now. Here's some other options and here's what's come of it. And be it really giving that power to the person and that family to make that decision. So it's a great question. And my hope is across the state, what I am finding, there's a lot of students exiting early or various situations. And with the data share from OSPI, working with these counties, getting the team I'll be hiring involved and working with the counties as well, and getting those counties equipped with the tools they need to get out into the schools to have those conversations with all the students who this could be an option for. So hopefully, Malia, that we could get to students so they know that that option is there for them and they can make that choice of what they want to do. So hopefully to be continued, I'll let you know how it goes.
Well, thank you so much for being here today, Melinda. Thank you to all. We've gotten some pretty amazing resources in the chat here from Melinda, from Eric, from a couple of our speakers. So we are definitely going to make sure that all those resources get put on our website. King County School to Work also has a great video about the School to Work program. So we're going to post that on our Advocacy Days page for today. Even our next speaker, Tanya, put some great stuff in the chat here. So we are going to move along to our last guest for today. Thank you again.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. And our last guest speaker for today, thank you for being here, is our OSPI. We've heard that word a lot. Our OSPI Assistant Superintendent for Special Education Services, Tanya May, and she's going to talk about education legislative updates. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. As Tanika said, my name is Tanya, and I serve as the Assistant Superintendent of Special Education for Washington State. I am a Latina woman in my 40s, and I'm wearing glasses. I have dark, straight hair. I'm wearing a brown sweater, and I am in front of a dark green background that says Washington Office of Superintendent of Public Instruction in the corner. I use she, her pronouns. And if you don't know much about my background, a few things to just know about myself. I am the child of a formerly undocumented immigrant. And so a lot of my schooling and childhood was focused on helping my parent navigate systems that are hard, like what we've been talking about today. When I decided to be a teacher, that was a big deal for me because I was actually a high school dropout. I had some challenges with my mental health when I was in high school and struggled to feel like I had support. So when I decided to be a teacher, I really wanted to work with students who needed more, right? Needed maybe something different, a different kind of school. And I was a special ed teacher for about 10 years when my own child was diagnosed with autism. And so she is now almost 15 years old, and she's in the process of transitioning male to female. And so every day I have an opportunity to learn more about being a parent, about being an ally, and an educator, and what I can try to do to work with the community and help make a difference. So thank you for that space to share a little bit about my own story. Always happy to talk with folks individually if there's anything that you want to know about me or want to share about yourself. So to pick up on what Melinda started to share, I love the work that I get to do with the Transition Collaborative. Many of you who are on with us today were so important in getting that established and helping to keep it going, including the amazing work that happened last legislative session on Senate Bill 5790, which Melinda just walked us through, this statewide supports for school to work. And so my piece is to do anything and everything that I can from that school side to support the work, to help DVR and DDA with these school to work efforts and our school partners as well. And specifically, we're working on the data share agreement that Melinda mentioned. And so what that would do is about 3 years before a student with a disability is getting ready to graduate or to leave the school system, OSPI would be able to send that list of students over to DVR and DDA and our counties, so that they're not just getting a number, but they're actually getting some information about the student. They'll get their name, they'll know which school district they're in, they'll know a little bit about their needs and programs. And our hope with this is that it would allow them to do some targeted outreach, right? Being able to work directly with the family and the student and make some plans to support that transition from school into the adult world. So we are working right now on a consent form because, you know, these are going to be adult students. And so making sure that they have informed consent for their information to be shared. We're working with schools to make sure that they know how to do this and how to talk about it. And then we're also creating a data collection system so that we can know who's provided consent. And then from there, we'll be able to create that system of information sharing. So I'll pause there for just a moment and see, is there any questions that people have either about the Transition Collaborative, anything Melinda and I talked about, or the data share? And do you think, oh, okay, thanks. Do you think that I could share my screen? Is that something that we could do?
Yes.
I know for myself, it's easier when I can look at something when we're talking about it. And so I just wanted to share with you a few of the bills that I'm going to walk through so that you can, if it helps you, you can see them. I will read it as we go through together. So can everyone see that okay? Okay, great. So Stacy and Diana had reached out to me and we talked a little bit about some of the bills that your community's following, some of the bills that we've been tracking in special education. So there's a few I wanted to just talk through, especially since today is our House of Origin cutoff, right? If they haven't passed out of their House of Origin today, they've got to do that today. Otherwise, they're not going to advance as is. They could be added as amendments or, you know, added onto other bills. So we're watching a few. So to pick up off of the conversation around transition and some of the updates that Melinda shared, there are a few bills related to graduation and transition that we thought you might be interested in. So the first one is House Bill 1308. And this one's a pretty big deal if you haven't been tracking it. So it would add on a graduation pathway option for all students, not just for students with disabilities. But it would allow some flexibility for students to meet their graduation pathway through a learning experience. And it does work to keep some rigor here and make sure that students are having a really high quality learning opportunity as they meet this graduation pathway. It can be work-based, it could be a project, it could be a capstone for students who are interested in arts, like performing arts or visual arts. They could have a portfolio for that. So it does include some data collection, really looking at which student groups are going to be using this pathway, and making sure that we do some reviews of implementation to keep these programs high quality. So we're watching that. That has passed out of the House and is on to the Senate. And then there's another bill that came out of the Senate, 5243, and that one would add some additional requirements for high school and beyond plans. And those plans are required of all students, so whether or not they have an IEP and a transition plan. And so it would revise some of those requirements. And it would also establish one common statewide platform so that if students are moving between school districts, if they transfer, they could carry that same platform and still know how to use it. So those are the main graduation and transition bills that we've been tracking. Diana, is Diana with us? I didn't know, Diana, if there was another one you were wondering about or wanted me to speak to.
Yes, I am here. The restraints and exclusion bills been pretty well hit today.
Sure.
I think what we're looking for is where all the major pieces of the cap, the multipliers, all that, where you think it's gonna land.
Okay, my crystal ball. I will try. Okay, so the next one is funding. So that tracks, I think, Diana, with what you were raising. So in terms of funding, there are a few bills that we're watching. The first one is in the House, House Bill 1436, and it did pass out of the House last week. Originally, this was our agency requested bill. OSPI worked with the sponsor to draft this, and originally it would have removed the cap totally. So just to make sure everybody knows what I mean when I say the cap, schools get special education funding. They get federal funding that flows through from the federal government to OSPI and then goes out to school districts. And they get all of that calculation. They also get a pretty significant amount of state special education funds from the legislature. And that's based on how many students with disabilities they have, how many students with IEPs they have in their schools. But when I say cap, Washington limits the amount of funds that they can get, that a district can get for state special ed funds at 13.5% of the population. So even though they have to serve all of the students with disabilities in their school district, if they need to serve, say, 15% of their population with IEPs, they still only get 13.5% of the money. So there's a gap there in what they receive, even though they have to still hire teachers, they have to still provide services. So the ask has been from all of us for the legislature to remove that cap totally. And so originally this bill would have done that. What it does now, the amended version, still will eventually remove the cap, but it kind of fades it out until the school year 27-28. So it kind of steps it up each year until it is removed. The other thing about state special ed funding that people should know is they get a certain amount for each student, right? It gets generated kind of per student with an IEP. And in order to do that, there are some multipliers that the state uses to give those funds out. So there's a preschool multiplier for students ages 3 to 5 and in preschool. And then for K-12, we have two different multipliers, and it's based on how much access students have to general education. So the more they're in general ed for their school day, the higher their multiplier would be. And so it would increase, this bill as amended would increase those multipliers a little bit, not as much as the original ask. And then it also has some changes to something called safety net. So safety net is a way for districts to get money, to have a grant fund when they are serving a student who has a very high cost program. So if they need some maybe significant medical services, or they're placed in a certain type of school that has a higher tuition because they need specialized services, districts can request reimbursement for that once they've paid out for those services. So this bill would make it a little bit easier for districts to get that money. It doesn't change it a lot. It's just really a very small change, but every little bit helps. And then it does also call out supports for inclusionary practices. So really trying to make sure that students with disabilities, that each and every student has access to general education and to core instruction. So it will continue that support. So that one we're watching. Over time, what we've noticed is that 1436 and 5311, the Senate bill, have started to look a little bit more similar. So if you'll see, if you're reading along with me, 5311 has some similar changes, but a few important differences. It doesn't totally remove the cap. 5311 would increase that cap to 15%. And then it does increase the pre-K and K-12 multipliers. It also would lower that threshold for safety net, make safety net a little bit easier for districts to get the funds. And something that you all might be interested in knowing is it would also establish some direct parent supports around special education advocacy from the Education Ombuds Office. So it calls that out and it would have some funding for that. And then it would require OSPI also to just do a review with the state auditor's office to look at how much of the general ed funds are being spent to support students with disabilities, right? Because students with disabilities are general education students. That money should be supporting all of our students, both with and without disabilities, and then special ed should only be used for the additional costs of special education. All right, so I pulled up the chat, and Stacy, I think you have a question or comment.
I do. Thank you, Tanya. This is super helpful because funding is pretty critical. So the things that I noticed is that in 5311, the difference between the 15% cap and the phase out, for example, in 1436, in 5311, there's no inclusive practices money either, is there? So
it doesn't call it out. But what we've been told is that, you know, the inclusionary practices money have always been a budget proviso. And so what we've been told is that they fully expect that if it's not called out in a specific bill, that it will be part of the budget proviso.
Okay, those are two important things that I know we'll be watching for. I know that study as well by the state auditors, very, very important. So we want to make sure that stays in whichever bill is the vehicle. So I just thought I'd call that out for everybody.
Yeah. Susan, Taylor, yes, I can get a copy of this to everyone, no problem. I can maybe send it to Diana and then we can get it out to everyone. And then Susan had a question. What is OSPI doing to advocate for the federal government to fully fund IDEA? So that's a great question. It's something that I talk about a lot. IDA always called for federal funding to support 40% of the costs of special education. And it's never even come close to that. I think the high that I've heard is that it was about 15% was the highest. And currently the estimate is that the federal funds cover about 13% of the cost of special education for states. So there is always ongoing advocacy. Our national partners, our state special education directors, the Council for Exceptional Children are always doing advocacy around that. Our state superintendent sent a letter this year to Patty Murray, Senator Murray, urging all of our congressional delegation to continue to advocate for IDEA to be fully funded. And then in this legislative session, our state legislators also have a statement where they are urging the congressional delegation to do the same. And then Eric had a question, disability and education issues. So I love that question. I think how we opened today's conversation around the importance of discontinuing the use of isolation and restraint, increasing trauma-informed practices, making sure that our educators understand the role that they play in either disrupting or continuing harm, and the opportunity that they have, right, to build inclusive, welcoming learning environments where everyone feels like they can learn and belong. To me, that is top of mind. And then, if you've talked with me in the past couple of years, the other journey that we've been on in Washington is really around inclusionary practices. We have over 80 years of research that shows that when students with disabilities have access to non-disabled peers and to the general education learning environment, their long-term outcomes, not only for school, but for life, improve. And so, anything that I can do, and my dogs agree, anything that I can do to support that work, I'll continue to do that. But thanks for those questions. I don't want to take up too much time. So those were the funding bills. I can share this document with you all. There's one more that I wanted to just make sure you had on your radar. House Bill 1305 has not passed out of the House today. right? And today is cutoff. So if this is a bill that you are interested in, this would be a good one to talk to your representatives about. So this bill would attempt to do a few things. So it would work to shorten the timeline, how much time students and families are waiting to find out eligibility for special education, right, and to receive services. So right now, when a family or another community member makes a referral for a child, the school has 25 school days to make a decision about whether they're going to do the evaluation. This would shorten that to 22 calendar days. So it's pretty significant shortening of that initial period. And then once the school district has made a decision to evaluate, it would shorten the evaluation timeline. Well, I guess I shouldn't say shorten. It would change the evaluation timeline from 35 school days to 60 calendar days. Those are pretty similar if you count up, how many school days and don't count weekends and holidays or summers versus 60 calendar days. But where it would start to make a difference is like over the summer, right? Because it wouldn't pause an evaluation timeline over the entire summer break for a student or over the entire winter break. It would keep that timeline moving. And the thing that you might be interested in is that the 60 calendar days is the same language that is in our federal IDA law. So Washington would just adopt that federal language. The bill originally also included a shift of the burden of proof for due process hearings. In the amended version, that was removed, but there was a floor amendment that added it back in. So we'll be watching today to see what happens with 1305 and the proposed amendments. So Josie, did you have a question or comment?
Sorry, my button wasn't working for me, but I kind of had more of a comment than a question, because when I was going to high school and I went to different high schools, a lot of my classes in each different high school that I went to did things differently for me. So for my 9th grade, I went to Peninsula High School, where there I had a homeroom with a lot of disabled kids, even a child that was using a wheelchair, and he could not even speak, and he had his own paraeducator. And I would often go up to Patrick and say, "Hi, Patrick, how are you doing today?" And he couldn't even speak to me, and the paraeducator would say, "Hey, Josie's here. Nice to see you again," And so, I mean, different high schools did something different. North Kitsap did something a lot different, where the kids in the wheelchairs had their own classroom, and often I would go into that classroom and say hi to them, because I enjoyed being around kids in wheelchairs and like saying hi to them. And even if they cannot speak back, the paraeducator would often speak for them because they had no language skills. And then the other school that I went to was Puyallup School, and that was my very last high school that I went to. Well, not really, because I ended up suing the crap out of them and teaching them that they should have a transition program. And then after that, I went to, because I did sue Puyallup, I did go to Sumner that already had a transition program in their school. And so I was able to do what was called the school to work program in each of my high schools, and even the middle school that I went to. So I mean, my school to work program started back in 6th grade, and it helped, and also being in different classrooms where I had a paraeducator, and so that I wouldn't get picked on as much because there was an adult with me and they wouldn't call me names, and bullies wouldn't call me names because, oh no, there's an adult with her of some sort. And so I mean, I think it's good to have paraeducators in with kids who need them, you know, especially in a classroom where majority of the students do not have a disability. So I could have still learned with with the peers who did not have a disability, but then I also got to learn with students with the disability. And I had a homeroom that I often went to where there was one paraeducator for the whole classroom and not just for me. So, I mean, there are different structures of different schools that I went to just because I was moving around a lot and I was a foster kid, and, you know,
Thank you, Josie, for sharing. Thanks everyone for the time. I will try to drop the document in the chat, and I'm always available. I'll put my email in there if you have any questions for me. But thank you so much.
All right, we're going to now move on and let Diana Staton speak on the updated bills of interest. Thank you so much, Tanya. This was a huge help. Seriously, huge help.
Hi, everybody. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the bills because we are running pretty late, and today is cutoff. So a lot of things are going to change, hopefully, by the end of the day. This is our bills of interest chart, and these ones that are highlighted in yellow are the ones that haven't yet passed. So you can see a lot of these bills have passed already, and some of them have hearings this week and next week already. So we still have, here's education, House Bill 1248 about transportation for students, House Bill 1305, which Tanya had mentioned. Those are the two under education. All the rest of these have passed. So we're really doing pretty good as far as our bills that we need to still work on and get through today. Now, there's a few of them down here. And then from there, we go to provisos, budget provisos, or bills that are necessary to implement the budget. This chart will be updated tomorrow morning on our website so that you can see where we are after the bill cutoff. So if you have any questions, everybody knows how to get a hold of me. I'll put my email in the chat. And so if you got questions about bills, you can email me and let me know. And I'm going to turn it over from there to Jessica.
Thank you, Diana.
After this briefing, you have many options to advocate with your legislators. You can schedule a Zoom meeting with your legislators, email today's information to them. You can also email your legislators about bills that are important to you and to set up appointments with them. First, you can email your legislators about bills that are important to you and to set up appointments with them. You can also watch legislative action on TVW at www.tvw.org. You can sign in to testify at future hearings. You can sign in pro, con, or submit written testimony on a bill. Let me show you how it works. Go to www.leg.wa.gov and scroll down to let your voice be heard. Click on participating in the process, then click on testifying in a virtual hearing. Choose House or Senate, depending on which committee you want to testify at. We'll look at a House bill today. Select the House button. Then for this morning, let's look at the House Committee on Healthcare and Wellness. Choose the date and time of the hearing. The hearing is March 10th, 2023 at 8 a.m. Then click the circle for SB 5189. Then select the type of testimony you want to give. You can do live testimony virtually via Zoom, or you can just sign in with your position on the bill. If you want to, you can submit written testimony. Today we will sign in to testify. Choose your position on the bill, pro, con, or other. Fill out the form with your name, email, full address, and phone number. If your name is hard to pronounce, you can sound it out in the pronunciation box. If your name is easy to pronounce, don't worry about filling out that box. Usually you will be testifying as an individual, but if you are part of a panel, you would enter your name and info as a new panelist, then add each person's info who will be on the panel after that. Finally, select I am not a robot. After you submit the registration form, an email will be sent to you with Zoom link information. Once you get the email, it has links to add it to your Outlook, Google, or Yahoo calendar. Advocacy Day is a project of the ARC of Washington State and funded by the Washington State Developmental Disabilities Council. Be sure to join us for future Advocacy Days. Register for each Advocacy Day on our website at www.arcwa.org/advocacy-ds. We want to make sure you are satisfied with Advocacy Days, so be sure to fill out our feedback form. Your feedback helps us to continue improving and helping your voice to be heard. Let's walk through it together. Start at arcwa.org/advocacy days. Scroll down to the 3 smiley faces that say your feedback matters, and then select click here. The link to the feedback form in Spanish is right below the link to the English version. Start by putting in your email address. Next, you select the date and topic of the Advocacy Day you're giving input for. You can then let us know if this is your first Advocacy Day or not. Next, you can answer 4 short questions by just picking the smiley faces that answer how you feel about the virtual Advocacy Day. Then you submit the form, just as simple as that. Your input helps the ARC to know what you like, what you don't like, what is helpful, and what is not helpful. You can learn about these and more ideas to get involved on our website at www.arcwa.org and click on Advocacy Days. You can also contact us at sale@arcwa.org or Diana@arcwa.org if you need help. Are there any questions?
All right. Well, that concludes today's Advocacy Day, and we will see you next week. And thank you to all the speakers that came. I believe this was pretty successful. What do you think, Tanika?
Yeah, I think this was awesome. Thank you to everyone that shared those stories. These are amazing. And remember, this is bill cutoff day. So get in there, type your legislators, call them, let them know all those wonderful bills and resources we got today. Let's go advocate and make some changes. So thank you all for being here for Advocacy Day.